Hey there, my friend. How are you doing? Thank you so much for pressing play and tuning into the URC space where we intentionally unbox our lives, one blank space at a time. My name is Nash, and I'm telling you, it has been so much fun to be the host of this podcast. And I'm so happy that we are going to be in this conversation together because for the first time in 2 weeks, we are going to be bringing Mariah Carey back into the conversation. Many of you have been tuning into the show, and you know that there's a long-standing thing, hashtag Mariah on the URC, to get Mariah here on the show, and I really am hopeful that one day it'll happen. You know, one of my favorite songs by Mariah Carey is Make It Happen. Love that song, Make It Happen, and I actually was reading the chapter, Make It Happen, in your book, Mariah, The Meaning of Mariah Carey by Mariah Carey with Michaela Angela Davis. I'm going to read a little excerpt from it for you. I hope you don't mind before we get into our show. It goes with the show, don't worry. There's a method to the madness today. And see, it was published by Andy Cohen Books from Henry Holt and Company. So make sure I get all the legalities out of the way so that Mariah doesn't look for no coin from me, because Mariah, listen, your boy is only in the first season of his show. So, you know, be nice to me. And I'll put a link to your book in today's episode notes as well, so that people can see all the publishing rights and all that good stuff too, because as an upcoming author, I know how important that all that stuff is. So this is in the Make It Happen chapter. And this is back when Mariah was singing background for Brenda K. Starr. And Mariah writes, I took the mic and gave that woo-woo a special Mariah remix with all kinds of vocal flourishes. And in the end, I took the last woo way up high into my high register because, you know, Mariah's got that 5-octave range, you know, impressive. And the whole crowd broke into a wild claps. That was the day Will Smith and I became friends. Will and I were both really young and looked it. Will was tall and lanky, dressed as if he expected a pickup game of hoops could break out at any moment. He was incredibly friendly and funny as his charismatic friend, Charlie Mack. Immediately, I could tell that he was not only super talented, but really bright and laser focused. I loved Parents Just Don't Understand, which was a single by Will Smith, and very impressed with what he had accomplished. Will and I would hang out sometimes at Rascals below the apartment I shared with Josephine. He was an uncomplicated friend. Both of us were absolutely ambitious and still maintained a childlike wonder and curiosity about the world. Our relationship was always platonic and never got weird. That was from page 120 in Mariah Carey's book. Mariah, I'm currently on page 261, so I'm getting all into gear in it. But if you remember last week on the show, I asked you if you were a fan of Will Smith and if you watched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air growing up. And I just found it to just be so funny that when I was reading Mariah Carey's book, there I came across the first time she met Will Smith when she was a background singer for Brenda K. Starr. So it's all about Will Smith today here on the show. But for those of you who have been just really engaged with me there on Instagram and into my emails as well, which is really professional, thank you. I want to say, you know, the one thing that y'all haven't mentioned is that we haven't talked about Mariah for 2 weeks here on the show. So we got to make sure Mariah was back in there. So I'm thankful that I happened to come across that portion of the book. And today we are in the reconciliation space here on the show, and we're going to be talking about forgiveness and having tough conversations, posturing yourself to want to have the tough conversations, and then kind of also posturing yourself to be willing to kind of accept whatever comes out of that. It can be tough, it can be challenging, but it's something that probably something all of us, if we want to, will have to face at one point in our lives. Like I said, if we want to. This is not something that we all have to do. It's a reality that no one is exempt from. And I'm hoping that in our talk today, we will begin setting a course and charting towards the goal of healing broken relationships. Oh my goodness. Relationships are not meant to be broken. Oh, that's just like in my heart. And I really hope that we can start to at least get ourselves postured in a way. And even if we don't want to, because it takes two to do it, right? You can't do it. You can't heal a broken relationship by yourself. But even if the other individual doesn't want to participate, at least we can position ourselves to just be free, to just, you know, forgive, make a continual decision about forgiveness, that it's not just a one-time thing. It's something that we just continually decide to do. And just move on with our lives and not be stuck in what someone did or said or didn't do or didn't say. And we can really get ourselves to loving in hard ways beyond the storybook fluff that we are given. So I know that many of you who are tuning in, you may not be familiar with Will Smith, or you may not even be familiar with The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And that's totally cool. You know, all of us grew up in different areas and we all have different experiences to what we were exposed to when it came to pop culture. I'm not going to spoil too much of the show for you. At least I'm going to try my best best not to. And I'm hoping that maybe, after today's show, you'll kind of be piqued to see what the show was all about. But when looking at what The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was, it was a show that was on TV in the 1990s, really from 1990 to 1996, which was also when, I just turned the chair over here in the studio to look at Mariah, because I'm like, when Mariah Carey was at the peak of her career, hitting the stage like a juggernaut, just, whew, I mean, she was very, very big back then. The show was very popular, and, it was about Will Smith, who was a kid from Philly, and Will Smith is really from Philadelphia. And he got into some trouble, and he couldn't stay, in Philadelphia in the inner city. And then he got moved with his aunt and uncle in Bel-Air in California, and he became the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And it tells it's just so beautifully acted out with the everyday struggles that, inner city kids are trying to deal with and surface with. And, it talked about one of the issues that I absolutely love that it talked about was the fatherlessness played on the show, and how his Uncle Phil really, filled in the gap there for him, with his fatherlessness. And it was just a very well done show. And while there were very serious moments and heavy moments, there also were very funny and silly moments. And it's just, really, it's a staple of 1990s pop culture, hands down. Take Me to Court, I'll debate you on that. I mean, it really is just such a great show. And if you haven't checked it out, I would really encourage you to do it. When the show really came about, it was Will Smith's saving grace. That little excerpt I read from Mariah Carey's book was when Will was still up and coming in music, and he was trying to get his music career off the ground, and it wasn't really going in the trajectory where he wanted it to be. And so he had some failed music attempts, and that combined with him not paying his taxes. Now, y'all know, the IRS gonna come for you if you don't pay your taxes. He owed the IRS $2.8 million. So when this show came about, his music career wasn't really successful. He had all these back taxes that he owed, and the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air really kind of, saved him. He was 21 years old, having his own TV show, and felt like he was on top of the world. I mean, I would too if I had a TV show at 21. But I also remember how I was at 21. I wasn't really that mature. I think throughout my life, people would always tell me like, oh, you're such an old soul. You're well beyond your years of when it came to maturity. But even at 21, I definitely did not even have a smidgen of the level of maturity I have now at 29. But, the cast of the show included, of course, Will Smith, and so many other, great actors and actresses. But one of them in particular, who is going to be incorporated in our conversation today, was Janet Hubert, who, when the show was on, she was 34 when she was casted. She had starred in major productions, like on Broadway, like Cats. Are you a Broadway person? I became a Broadway person. My younger sister is really into Broadway, and I took her to go see Chicago for her birthday a couple years ago. We went to New York to, do the New York thing and really, take in the sights and the sounds, which was great. I was working for a company, which I don't know, at one point in my life, and they had a derivative of Cats on the show. And it was, very well done. And listen, you got to be talented to be in that show. So Janet, she could sing, she could dance, she can act, and she was there on the show, and she came from that Broadway world. And, Will came from the city world, more so less. And then all of a sudden, when the show was airing, the character that Janet was cast for was Aunt Viv, who was like a mother figure to Will on the show. That character began looking a little bit different when the show was airing. And when I say a little bit different, like, I'm not talking, she, got pregnant and, she just started, the baby began growing in her belly, and she just looked like, oh, she's getting ready to give birth. Like, not that kind of different, or not that kind of different where you go on a vacation somewhere near the equator and you come back with this, luxurious glow that everyone realizes and loves. No, not that different either. The different I'm talking about is it was a completely different person that then took on that character. And it was just kind of weird and strange and just very random. There was a lot of speculations that began brewing, and there was word on the street that Janet was very difficult to work with, and there were some things that she wanted, some demands that she wanted that Will didn't want to participate in. And again, Will is 21. He's the shot caller of the show. And, if you're not going along to get along, you might get ousted and you might get put on the outskirts of everything with the show's production. She was given this reduced role and an offer that made no sense to her. They wanted her to work for 10 weeks. And in that stipulation, you work here for 10 weeks, but you can't work anywhere else. And it's like when you are a performing actor, you got to keep, the lights on. So you do different gigs here and there, and they wouldn't allow her to do that. And she said it didn't make sense to her that, for that salary and for, that little amount of work, that was not going to be conducive to her lifestyle. And she needed to go and move and find something else. And that's what she wound up doing. And she walked away from the show. And Will also agreed that the offer that she got didn't make sense. And Will says that he didn't know what the offer was. And he didn't know that it was only for 10 weeks. And there was a stipulation that she couldn't. I know Will is saying that he didn't know, but I really believe that he did. I'm not really going to buy that, Will, but we're just going to keep on with this conversation. Amen. So, essentially, she was replaced with another actress, Daphne Maxwell Reid. And then, Janet said she lost everything because Will had went on to a show and had said that she wanted it to be the Aunt Viv of Bel Air show. And Will was, not having any parts of that, or he didn't want to entertain that. And then there was a lot of speculations, that was going on with, the different headlines, because Daphne Maxwell Reid is a lighter skinned Black woman, and Aunt Viv, the original Aunt Viv, Janet Hubert, is a darker skinned Black woman. And for those of us in the Black community, we know this whole conversation of colorism, and which, dates back to the slavery days. Lighter skinned Black folks were able to, be servants in the house, and darker skinned Black folks had to work out in the fields. And, so there was, that stemming thread of, the darker you are, you're not wanted, you're ugly, get out. The lighter you are, the more favorable you'll be, and all of that kind of thing. And I don't know if this whole colorism happens in other communities. I can't really speak for other communities. I can only speak for the Black community because I'm Black, and I know that I've seen it and, have been compared, because I am a darker complected Black man to a lighter complected Black man, and just all of that foolishness and craziness, which we can talk about on a whole nother episode. But the story really goes that Janet wanted to be professional on set. She comes from Broadway, which is a very, I can only imagine, very rigorous, this is the call time, this is where you're on the show, this is where you're on set. And I've worked with Broadway actors and actresses before, and they're very disciplined, and they're very, 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 very serious about their craft. The ones who are really in it for the right reasons. They're very serious about their craft. And, Will, apparently, according to the story, allegedly wanted to just, be loud and a clown and, the fun guy on set. Janet didn't laugh at the jokes that Will was cracking, and she didn't go along with everything he was saying. And that made it a bit complicated for the both of them. I remembered when I was working for a company, which I do not know, and I showed up on the first day of my assignment in a full suit with all my luggage, fresh from Baltimore. And I walked into my boss's office, and I sat down, and I got to meet him and a number of other leadership members of the team. And they all looked at me like, who the heck does this guy think he is, wearing a full-on suit, walking into this place? And I wanted to send a subliminal message. I am not here to play the game. I'm not here to be your clown. I'm not here to be your puppet. I'm not here to be your Muppet. I'm here to do a job, and I'm here to be business. And I want to send a subliminal message that that's what I'm all about in my suit. And sometimes when people don't understand professionalism, they'll criticize it for something that it's not. And I think, just from what I was gathering from what Will and Janet were discussing, and Janet's background coming from where she did and Will's background coming from where he did, and then, the two of them having to work together, there was a clash. And I think that maybe perhaps Will was criticizing what he couldn't understand when it came from the perspective of Janet. And I completely, or at least that's just what I'm tracking, because I know that was my own experience when I decided to present myself in a certain way and carry myself in a certain way and have certain boundaries in place when I was in different professional environments, because I didn't want to, come off or portray being unprofessional. So, Will said what he said, and then Janet said what she said. And there was this whole public outcry of, This is the reason why she got fired. This is the reason why she left. This is the reason why. This is the reason why. And it all kind of really kind of came back on her, her. And Will wasn't really involved in the conversation. I think, he did do a radio interview where he said some things that weren't really favorable. And Janet also, got and made a video and put that out there for the world to see that also wasn't favorable. And you could just tell that there were just two really hurt people involved with it. And the powerful reunion that came between the two of them was really just a blessing to see. And it took them 30 years to have that powerful conversation. And that conversation was so powerful. That conversation was so powerful that they were able to hug and apologize. And that was beautiful to see. Like really beautiful to see. But again, it took two people to have that conversation. Will couldn't have that conversation by himself, and Janet couldn't have that conversation with herself either. But if we are going to find ourselves in the reconciliation space where forgiveness and love can lead our words and our actions, we have to be able to posture our hearts to literally come together with maybe situations and things that we've said and done in the past that we aren't necessarily proud of, that we don't necessarily want to replay, that we don't necessarily even want to hear it sometimes. But if we can even consider having our hearts towards that perspective, I believe that makes us a lot braver and a lot better as humans, and it will heal us and make us whole. That is something that really spoke out the strongest to me when looking at their conversation and this reunion they had, because HBO was doing this very, very nice 30-year reunion of the show. And, Will had said, I could not do this reunion of the show unless I had Janet involved, who was the original on Viv, and I cannot have Janet involved until I have the conversation. So again, I'm also kind of a little questionable about the motive here, Will. Not saying that you did it from the right place and the right space and the way in which you did it. And you had the clinical psychologist there to help you unbox everything. And we'll get into what the two of you spoke about. But, if there wasn't a 30-year reunion happening for the show, would you still have done this off air? Would you still have opened yourself to be willing to have this conversation with her? This was a conversation, or that was a question that came up when I was discussing this with my sisters, because I watched the video of all of this unfold, which of course, the link for the entire conversation that happened between Will and Janet, I'm going to be placing in the Unboxed Goods section of today's episode description. And my sisters and I watched this together. I watched it first by myself, and then I invited my younger sisters to watch it with me, and we watched it together as a sibling trio. And that was one of the questions that came up. If you didn't have this reunion, would you still have done this? And then I watched it again by myself to prepare for the conversation that you and I are having today. And there were just a few things and a few takeaways that I kind of have bubbling at the top of my head when it came to just some thoughts on Will and Janet. Hubert, I guess I got to say Janet Hubert, because if I say just Janet, do you by default go to Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson's younger sister? The first thing that came to mind for me is I felt that the clinical psychologist was on Will's side. I didn't like how the clinical psychologist and Will were having the conversation about the conversation that Janet and Will were having. I know that's a convoluted mess trying to say that. The conversation that they were having without Janet there. I think it would have been great to see the clinical psychologist navigate kind of an after show conversation with Will and Janet. But I do also understand that there were some deeply rooted things that came out of the conversation that the clinical psychologist had with Will that helped bring a lot of understanding to the tumultuous 30-year play out of this whole dissonance and estrangement that was between the original Aunt Viv and the Fresh Prince. The one thing I also didn't like was Will said in his conversation with Janet that he felt threatened. And, that's when he went on and said, I had all this money I owed to the IRS. My music career wasn't taking off. I was trying to become the biggest star. I was making a movie, an album, and doing a TV show every year. And with all of that, which by the way, Forbes magazine has ranked him as one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. So you definitely have earned that, Mr. Smith. We give you that for sure. My West Philadelphia brother. Well, my family's from South Philly. I'm actually here in the studio wearing my Eagles hoodie today. Fly, Eagles, fly. So, it's all Philly love here, Will. And I'm not coming after you. I'm just sharing what I observed in the whole thing that went down, Facebook Watch, when you did the Red Table Takeover. And I didn't like how he said that he felt threatened, but he didn't say that he felt threatened by Janet to her face. He said it after the fact when he was having the one-on-one with a clinical psychologist. And I think Janet deserved to hear that, not through the grapevine. So I wish she would have said that to her face. And I know it's hard to say those things to people because that's a lot of pride and ego to tell someone else at 21, I felt threatened by you. And, one thing that I loved about all of this is that whatever you don't confront and address in your personal life, it will confront and address you in so many other areas. And, one of the areas where it tends to bleed out, and it's very untasteful, and it tends to bleed out in our professional lives. And we have to be very, very cognizant and very, very, very careful of that. When we don't heal those family, those trauma wounds from when we were younger, it's going to play out in every other area, every relationship that we have, every professional interaction that we have, even in the interactions that we have casually at a grocery store. We shut down or we cut out or we, cut people off in a certain way because of some things that we just haven't confronted and dealt with. And I like how the psychologist was really able to help Will unearth the reason why his behavior was the way, which stemmed from his childhood. And I'm not going to give too much of that away. I think that that's something that you would really enjoy hearing and seeing for yourself. So definitely make sure you check out the full story with the link in the show notes from today. But I think we really have to just make it a point to just keep our family trauma whole and healed. I originally was going to say keep our family trauma in check, but I think we got to do better than keeping it in check. We really got to keep that whole and keep it healed. And this is something that I'm striving for. This is something that I am continually, daily being intentional about. I don't think this is something that we always arrive in. And the same way forgiveness is not something you always arrive in. You say, I forgave this person. Yeah, you forgave them. But then when that memory comes back up, or when they do something else, or they say something crazy, do you still forgive them? You have to remind yourself, oh, no, I forgave them. And get yourself back shifted into that posture of reconciliation. And that's very hard to do because, again, ego and pride has got to be the first thing to go. Janet said, the whole ordeal made her feel like she served a 30-year sentence. And, she went into some details about her things that she was going through. She was going through an abusive marriage. But again, she was going through an abusive marriage, but never brought that on set. She decided to be professional while she was on the set. And maybe you're thinking I'm taking Janet's side in all of this. I'm not taking Janet's side because I think there were ways that Janet went about handling this that I wouldn't necessarily agree with handling it with the public outcries and responses that she had given in the process. But I think that the two of them coming together at the end of the day, that's really the point of our conversation, is that you can be at odds with someone for, yes, even upwards of 30 years, and reconciliation and wholeness and peace and unity can still prevail. The high road is still being traveled on. We do not have to get in the gutter with these people who want to drag us for this or drag for filth. Is that what the kids say in these streets? All that. We don't have to get involved with all of that. And, there were a few notes that, the psychologist had said, and I loved when she said most childhood wounds stem from those who weren't listened to thoroughly. And that was Will's reality. That's been my reality, and maybe that's been your reality as well. Will and Jada Pinkett Smith is Will Smith's wife. And I love this thing that Will had shared about their relationship. And he had said they have a practice that when they communicate to each other, right after someone communicates, they instantly repeat back what they heard just to ensure that the communication channel was clear and nothing was misconstrued or mistransposed, and the whole intent versus impact. And I found that to be very powerful and something I think I'm going to try to incorporate even with my own self, because I have been in instances where, someone or, in a conversation with someone, and they said, and I remember they would say, and you made me feel this and you made me feel like that. And I was like, but I never said that. What are you talking about? And they said, well, your actions and you the way that you this and the way that you that. And I said, oh my goodness. Okay. So the next time when you communicate something, I need to just posture myself to then say, okay, this is what I'm hearing you're telling me. And now that I've heard this, how can I best serve you in the capacity of your friend to ensure that I am being supportive and that I am not giving you the notion or the feeling that I am not in agreement with whatever, with the next thing that's before you. That's a hard thing, man, because you got to swallow your pride, you got to swallow your ego, because it's very easy to be like, oh, okay, all right, well, praise the Lord then. and keep it moving. But here in the URC space, we're really being challenged and just having some authentic, raw conversation about just some areas in life that we really, I think, will become all the better for if we decide to engage. And at the end of the day, this is really going to be the whammy that is just going to take us into the closing of the show. We have to be able to withstand someone else's truth. We've got to be able to withstand someone else's truth, no matter how much we don't want to hear it, how much we don't want to see it, how much we don't want to acknowledge it. We have to be able to withstand someone else's truth. Yes, I'm going to say that again. We just have to, because that will then put us in a position to where we can be open to reconciliation and wholeness and getting ourselves just in a way where we don't have to bleed out in all the other areas of our life because we have taken care of self. See, that is self-care. We're talking about the self-care space a couple of weeks ago. That is self-care. We all have a story. I know we do. And it doesn't mean that we have to be so built up and we have to have our walls up and we have to act recklessly around people, because today we talked about a happy ending. No matter the circumstances, no matter how it came about, it came about. And Janet and Will were able to come together and share their reconciliation and forgiveness with all of us. And we're here talking about it. And that was a happy ending. But I wonder how many more happy endings would we be able to have if only we could swallow our pride and be able to simply withstand someone else's truth. That's powerful, right? There's not going to be a part 2 to this particular conversation, but we will kind of have this interwoven just a little bit into what we're going to be discussing next week. And I'm really excited for those of you who are enjoying the guests that are on the show. I'm going to be bringing a guest with me next week here, and we're going to be in the estranged family space. Oh yeah, it's going to get a little uncomfortable perhaps, but I've enlisted some help. I've got a personal edge who's going to be coming on the show with me, my Yami, my other mother, who I talked about a little bit last week. And I cannot wait for her to help me unbox this topic. And, she is a wealth of wisdom. Let me just start with that. And she's really going to be giving us a lot of insight and tools and practical steps that we can do to love from hard places, posture our hearts to not ever get hard, and to continue moving on and living with our lives despite the response or the reaction of them folk out in the street. You heard me? I hope you'll join me then for that conversation. But until we resume then, I want you to remember to keep unboxing your life one blank space at a time, living undaunted, knowing that you're unbreakable, and embracing the reality that you're simply a treasure that's unfinished, because you have certainly been redeemed, you have certainly been restored, and you have certainly been reclaimed. All of them bona fide, certified facts. Life is always best lived outside the box. Stay free, my friend. And next week, I can't wait to dive deep with you. I'll see you then.